Hey folks, welcome back to another video. Let's talk about the E-Snare device in Bitwig Studio, or snares in general in Bitwig Studio. So we have this E-Snare device here, which consists basically of two oscillators, oscillator 1 and 2. And we have here a mix section where you can mix between oscillator 1 and 2 only. And also mix section here, we can blend in, can shape the noise here with the envelope, and also we have here some filters. And yeah, an output section. So it's pretty simple device. It's a synthesizer, monophonic synthesizer, and it's mainly the aim of the synthesizer is creating snare sounds. So all these parameters here are in different ranges or have some specific ranges to them. So when I have here the mix knob at 50%, we want to we can hear the two oscillators playing. You can also see this here inside this graph, or maybe I put this here on to let's so freeze. You can see we have two frequencies here. This is oscillator 1 and this is oscillator 2. And oscillator 1 has a tuning, so we can choose between the frequencies pretty freely, between 50 Hertz and 494 Hertz. So it's a pretty limited range, but it's completely fine for snares. And the second one has only an offset, so it means it also changes the frequency with the oscillator 1. So when we put this here back to slow, and I change this frequency here, you can see oscillator 2 also changes the frequency, but you have an offset here, so we can set this to maybe 12, so which is exactly 1 octave higher than the first oscillator. But it's also, getting the frequency, the main root frequency from the first oscillator. And it's the same for the decay, I think. So when we have here a longer decay, we have only here an offset for the first decay. So when the first oscillator has a short decay, also the second oscillator has a short decay. You can only modify or offset this decay time here a little bit from the first oscillator. So this is important to know. So most of the times to make actually snare sounds, you don't need two oscillators. You can just freely use the first one here and dial in a bit of noise. Make the decay of the noise a bit shorter. And you maybe can add some distortion, because distortion is always nice on snares. So most of these deep snares, is around 150 Hertz. These old school, hip-hop drums or power drums, I don't know how you want to call it. It's also really important how you shape the noise on top of the oscillator. So for instance, shorter noise sounds like this. So you only have noise a bit in the attack phase, or you keep it a bit longer. And you keep the tonal part short. So it's more like this. So you get these type of drums, right? So for hip hop, or if you want to have more of these fat type of deep sounding snare sounds, then you can also get these light snare drums by using, for instance, higher tunings. It almost sounds like a rim shot, not really, but can also help you to improve this, so it sounds more like a rim shot, because rim shot has frequencies all over the place at 1K. So it's not really bad that you have not precise frequencies there. So something like this. Keep the noise short, because the rim shot doesn't have that much noise probably. But just a little bit, it helps to improve sometimes. Also nice to help to improve here the weird or the random frequencies over here by using the Q factor, which is basically just an EQ, and you improve the quality of the filter here. So you get some nice additional tonalities out of this too. So it helps to shape even more the sound you're going for out of this device here. What I usually do sometimes is also that I'm not happy with the limitation of 494 Hertz here. You can just switch to the second oscillator, where you can offset here by, let's say, +1 to +19. So you get only the second oscillator, which then gets even higher. This is the limit of the oscillator 1. That's the limit of the oscillator 2 then. So you can, just use oscillator 2 with a bit of noise. Maybe turn down here the width. So this is basically making the noise more stereo, so we have a different noise signal on the left and the right channel. So sometimes it helps to bring this down to mono, or just dial it in a little bit. Or keep it noise only. The Q factor needs to go up more here, but you can use then here distortion and shape it to the frequency you want to. So this is also possible with the E-Snare to make some kind of rim shots or light-headed snare sounds. But it's all about how you treat these sounds, right? So you can use distortion, of course. You can also do the same thing I did with the kick drums in the other tutorial, where you split up the frequencies here. And maybe we go for oscillator 1, maybe go to 200, something like this. And most snares don't have these long tonal things here, right? They are more like short. So if you go for drum bass, you usually go here up to the 200, 300 Hertz range. Make the attack phase pretty short. Maybe dial in a bit of oscillator 2 until it sounds nice. Bit of noise. Okay, so now we can here do something like distortion on the lower part. So we can amp up the lower frequencies, everything below 300 Hertz. Then we have the upper frequencies. We kind of treat them a bit differently. We can also use here an EQ. To EQ something out. And then if you're not happy with the tuning, you just turn out the tuning knob, and everything else basically follows the oscillator 1. Also important for snare sounds, or also for kick drums and hi-hats or drums in general, is of course the room sound. So we can use the new convolution device here to get a bit of room in there. So let's try some studio halls, or maybe studio rooms, to have something short. Small room, something like this. Let's try this one. So this is of course way too too roomy because we have this in front of the distortion device, but I sometimes like to do that, to have reverb or convolution before I put distortion on there. Maybe use this one here, so we fade this out a bit. So you can help with the convolution device or with some short reverbs to improve the snare sound, so it sounds more like a real sound, or yeah, a drummer plays this actually in a real room. So you need some room information at least on the drums at some point in your chain. Oh yeah, this is nice. Or you can, you know, just use it after the distortion. Which also helps to yeah, how can I put it? It helps to shape the sound a bit more, because it sounds more like real sound, so you know that it sounds not like a real snare drum. So we need more noise here. So for most drums, or for drum bass drums, I look that I have short decay times for the tonal parts, and then play around with the noise a lot to find a sweet spot for the decay settings and also for the filter, so it doesn't have too much high end in there and you know, interferes with the hi-hats, and also that I remove enough low end on the noise. That's also sometimes important. And when you do some fat drums or some slower drums, then of course I blow up here a bit more the oscillator 1 and go in lower frequencies here. And then use distortion a lot. That's okay, so. As you can see, EQs do a lot on these snare sounds, so don't be afraid to EQ actually a lot. I really sometimes shape all my snare drums in a lot of ways with the EQ. It's not about mixing here, it's just basically sound designing, so I want to amplify certain parts of my snare. Right, and then use distortion, or you can use the saturator, which is also nice. And then we bring this here down a bit. So this is more like a gate effect here when we bring this down. Right, so all the quiet parts are getting cut here by this. Bring this down here. Bring the drive up. So it helps a bit. And then we have, of course, what else? Yes, the amp device. So we can do a lot with this. And you can see I have the amp device here on a special setting, and this is basically a setting for having an how it's called. It's an overdrive. It's not a hard clip. It's a soft clip. Yeah, that's what I'm going for. So smooth. All the input EQs at 0. Basically on bypass, and drive 0, this 0, or everything 0. And then you can bring up the drive here and kind of soft clip everything that's go in there. So amp device is also nice for this. You also get your cabinet, which is kind of a room simulator. But I found this not very satisfying to use. Maybe there are some tricks in there you can do, but for me I never use this really here. And you also have EQs to shape the signal before it goes into the overdrive. So 1K is almost always important for drum sounds. It's where the ear is most sensible for. So most of the snare drums have something going on with 1K. And maybe distortion. So let's remove the room here. It sounds completely different, right? So the convolution is it's pretty important. If you have this in the new update, then I use it on snare drums or kick drums mostly all of the time. Maybe exchange the room here. Or maybe use here something I imported from Trash 2 potties. That's barely noticeable. It gets a bit of texture on top. Not much. Yeah, and also if you want to go for texture, then the same applies for kick drums, is that you actually combine this with a real sample by something from a real drum set maybe. So let's search for snares here. These are digital, of course. Yeah, let's go for the tight one here. So something like this. So you can combine this here with the sampler. So you have a layer that plays two instruments, one the E-Snare and the second is the sampler here. When you hit something on your keyboard, you play this one and this one. So we need to switch off here the key tracking. Maybe need to tune this a bit more. Maybe you need to low pass here. Just to get the texture on top. The meat of the sound is coming from the E-Snare. And this is maybe way too loud. So let's bring this down. Maybe put here distortion on that. And then you mix it together. Maybe you can also use the ADSR here to shorten the sample a bit. Or slow it down. And basically fake that's what we do here on the E-Snare with the noise. We can also do with the sample, of course. We can disable the noise in here and just use a high passed real sample in here. Right, so this is our E-Snare, and then we layer the sample on top. And it sounds completely different. Also at a certain point by low cutting this here, it doesn't matter which pitch you really use. Everything that makes noise has no tonality, so it's not really important to find here the right tuning or something like this. I freely combine this. Another interesting thing is that when we have these two layers now in here, we trigger the sampler and the E-Snare with the same note or with the same key input. So I'm using here my MIDI keyboard, but when you paint in your notes, you have of course just one note, right? That triggers both of these. So we can use in here an ADSR which is triggered by the keys. And we can use this to duck the transient of the snare sound here by just modulating the volume. So every time we hit the key, we hear the transient of the E-Snare, and then after this phase, the texture or the sample from the sampler here comes in. So we can shape this even more. So we can make sure that only the transient is coming from the E-Snare and not the sample. So sometimes you have samples that are pretty heavy processed with transient shapers, and you know the transient is blown up all the way, and you can help you a bit with this here by ducking just transients down every time you trigger the E-Snare. Yeah. So easy to do, easy layering. You can of course layer multiple sounds. Sometimes I have 2 or 3 sounds when I'm going for clap sounds. So instead of having this, I'm wanting to do maybe some future garage stuff. So I need I know I need some higher pitched, something like this. Need a bit of noise. So it almost sounds like a clap. So I can bring in here a clap sound. It's way too long. Maybe this there. And then I do something like using here this time machine or time shift. And then you can drag or pull or push these individual sounds more in the future, or even, let's use milliseconds here. So you can kind of simulate some clap sounds that play at different times. Let's do something like this. Something like this. Something like this. So let's see. Okay, we need to delete here all the key trackings. And maybe change some of the volumes. Maybe do this here, this clap sound. So something like this. And then we can of course also use here the time shift device. And change some of the timings here. It's even better to use here probably the offset when you have room in the beginning here. Maybe push this even more here. It's maybe too much. It's too much, but you get the idea. Also interesting is to use some of these sounds in different pannings. So you get more like a stereo effect of these clap sounds, and you can shape the meat of your clap or your rim shot or whatever you want to do easily here just with the E-Snare. Oh, this sounds nice. And then you can also put processing here on the FX bus, which then applies to all these layers at the same time. So we cut here the low end. And maybe a peak limiter. You can also use FX3. Put limiters on each of these. Maybe here. There needs to be low end in there. Maybe it doesn't sound that nice. So I'm just leaving here a peak limiter. I think this sounds nice. Maybe a reverb. Let's see how this sounds. That's okay. And then you maybe create just some kick drums in there. I'll just pull this down. Do something like this. Bit of distortion. Just the disperser. Sometimes it switches the plugin. FX to. Well, let's put the distortion in there. EQ this a bit. Put the peak limiter in there. So something like this. Hi-hat. No, it's called E-hat. So maybe I do a tutorial on the E-hat also at some point. So let's do here some small hi-hats. Bring in some groove. So in this context, you can maybe also treat the snare a bit better when you have a kick drum and a hi-hat in there, because you get some, you know, get the whole scope of it. So sometimes I find it easier to make snare drums in context to the other drums in the drum set. And sometimes it's also, you get different results, basically. You get different results by doing snare sounds on your own or in combination with your with the rest of the drum kit. So now that we have this, we can tweak here the snare a bit. Maybe try out the convolution. Wet FX, maybe just cut here the high end a bit. So the main benefit or the main thing about snare drums is basically using distortion and EQ and also saturation. All the distortion effects basically is a nice way of shaping your drum sounds. And then using EQs, overdrive here, distortion, splitting the sound into multiple pathways here, and then shaping them a bit differently. Of course, adding some room with convolution and small short reverbs, and then layering with different other sounds is really important most of the times to get in the texture, that feel that it's a real drum sound. And what else? Yeah, sometimes I really enjoy of using here a Valhalla. So E-Snare. That's quiet again. And then using Supermassive. And then using some algorithm here you like. Something like this, but you use a short decay time. And you amp up the feedback. Maybe modulation rate here. Maybe use Gemini. So something like this can help. Indent distortion. So you get also some kind of room, and it sounds like more like physical, because it's basically like physical modeling. What you do. Or if you don't want to use Valhalla, you can also use the comp filter here from Bitwig Studio. You have a lot of feedback you can dial in. So you can add a bit of tonality or texture on top with the comp filter. But I prefer to use Valhalla. You can probably also use Delay Plus for this now. You switch this here to this mode. Maybe put the limiter on here. Make this short. So you can also use this to bring in some metallic sound or metallic feel if you want to. So it's all about shaping the sound, bringing noise in, bringing room in, and maybe metallic sounds, so textures with layering, with samples, or using physical modeling like I did here with the Delay Plus. So it's all about that, right? And I think the hardest part is probably when you are a beginner is to actually know what makes a snare sound great, or it's actually also hard to explain what makes a snare sound great, because it depends on, is it the right song? Are all the sounds around the snare sounding good or fitting to the snare sound? So the context is important. And also there are a lot of different snare sounds that can work. So you have high-pitched snares, you have rim shots, you have these deep and fat snares, you have short snares, long snares. So you can use everything for everything. So basically, that's what I wanted to say. So it's not like you have one answer or one way of doing it. It's multiple ways, and everything is right in the right context. And there is no wrong. There are also people like FX Twin, maybe they define snare sounds in a completely different way. And they say, this is a snare sound for me. This sounds like a snare sound. Or some people just use some vocals as a snare sound, or someone coughing, or I don't know. So it's not really that there's one set way of doing things. It's all that you have a lot of opportunities inside Bitwig Studio of creating snare sounds or rimshot sounds, shaping them and using them in your track. So the best advice is probably to look for your track. What do you have in your track? And then come up with places where you have no frequencies, right? Or like an empty space of frequencies. And then you can use these frequencies for your snares to fill in the space. So yeah, like I said, it's about the context of this, of the surroundings of every sound, basically. So it needs its place in the frequency spectrum. So that's more or less the important part. So there's also a possibility that you have weak sounding snares that sound weak on their own, but when you blend in the rest of the song with all the different other drums and percussions and strings and vocals, then it sounds completely perfect. This is also possible. So don't be fooled of, you know, creating a snare sound on its own and making it super beautiful and super frequency rich, and then it doesn't fit in your track. That's also where I had problems early on with Native Instruments presets. I used all these Native Instrument presets for sounds and pads and lead sounds, and they were also rich and beautiful, and everything sounded so nice in all the demos. And then you actually want to put these sounds into your songs, and they never fit, because you have to cut so many stuff out to make it actually fit in your song. So don't be fooled by this, and don't be shy away from having weak sounding samples or sounds in your song. When they fit in with the rest of the song, it's perfect. You have basically find the missing parts to your song and put these in with all these instruments. I think that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you made it to this point, it's already 36 minutes. Wow. Okay. So thanks for watching. Please leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel, and I see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and bye.